it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Yappy Birthday add-on and Christmas Dreams. So I've stamped those images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. Starting with the little dog that is tangled up in those pennant banners, and I thought I would try a different combo for him today. Rather than going with grays or browns, I decided to go with the E70s. They have more of like a grayish tone, which I think is really nice. I was going for something like a Weimaraner, although I also had a friend who had a Great Dane who was this color. So I went with E70, E71, E74 and E77. For the body, I'm just using the lightest 3 shades. So I started with the E74 for my shadows, laid those in, and now I'm blending that out with the E71. And then I'm going to fill in the rest of his body with that E70. Just making sure to grab the edge of the previous shade there and smooth everything out so I have a nice blend. And then once I have filled him in, I wanted to do his ear in a little bit of a contrast. So that's where I'm bringing in that E77. I'm going to blend that out with the E74 and then use the E71 for the highlight. For the other little dog, I decided to go with some E30s. I'm using E30, E31, E33, and E35. And for him, I'm only going to use the darkest 3 shades on the majority of the body. So I'm starting with that E35 for the shadows. And I'll blend out with the E33 and then add some highlights with the E31. And this time I was kind of going for maybe a Shiba Inu. But I think that it would also be fun to color like an Australian Shepherd, which is what my dog is. The only difference is that her ears are down instead of up, but other than that, it looks a lot like her. That's one thing I absolutely love about these new Yappy Birthday stamp sets is that there's just so many breeds represented, and the way that they're drawn, I think that a lot of them could be different breeds just depending on how you choose to color them. So very, very excited about these new little pups that have been added to the Lawn Fawn lineup. To add a little bit of dimension to the white areas on the chest and the muzzle and the inner parts of the ears, I'm going to take that E30, just add a very little bit of shading there. I also use that for the 2 little bones, which are from the Christmas Dreams stamp set. There wasn't quite enough contrast on there, so I did add in a touch of the E31 as well. And then I'm going to move on to the doghouse, and I went back and forth on what color to do this. I mean, you can do any shade because obviously it can be just plain wood or it can be painted. I decided to go with these kind of gray toned blues because I thought that would look a bit more like something that was weathered and had been sitting outside for a while. So I went with B91, B93, and B95. I laid in a little shadow under the roof line with that B95 and then also down the 2 sides and a little bit around the opening of the door on the right. And then I blended that out with the B93. Just really carefully going around those little pennant banners, and then I'm going to fill in the rest of that space with the B91. And I hadn't decided whether or not I wanted that little paw print on top to be a little cutout or if I wanted it to be more of like a plaque. So I just colored carefully around it for now, and that way I could make my decision later on. For the opening, I'm going to use E43, E44, and E47. These are browns that also have a lot of like a gray undertone to them, so I think they work really good for shadows, and that's what I was going for here. So I used the E47 down toward the bottom, blended up with the E44 at a bit of a diagonal, and then filled in the rest with the E43. And I also used those shades for the frosting, and I almost didn't because I often do use these shades for like a chocolate frosting, but I decided that maybe it's beef flavored or something else that dogs would like. And then for the inside, I went back to my E33 and E35 and actually added in the E31 as well. So maybe it's peanut butter or chicken or some other combination that would be a dog's delight. And then I'm going to do some rosy cheeks for these guys. So I'm using R21 and R22 for that. Just a little touch of that R22 and then blending out with the R21. And on the Shiba Inu, it was still a little bit too bright. So I'm actually going to grab a lighter shade to just blend out the bottom edge of the cheeks. I'm using R01 for that. And then I'll soften it into the fur tone. And I'm going to keep the R22 and add in R24 and R29. And I'm going to start to do some of these pennant banners. I decided to go for a color palette of red and blue for most of these little accessory images. So I'm just skipping over every other pennant banner and doing the other ones red, using that R29 first in the corner and then blending out with the R24 and then adding a little of that R22 for a highlight. And I'm going to do the same thing for the little banners on top of the doghouse, just the same combos. And I just thought I would tie everything in really nicely to keep the color palette really simple. I'll do the dog bowl with this red as well. I think limiting your color palette, especially like the accessory images, so anything except for the neutrals or like the natural elements like the grasses, but limiting that color palette can really unify a scene, and red and blue work really well for masculine cards as well. I think this one could be given to anybody, but just keeping to that color palette ensures that I've got a card that if I need to give to a guy, this one would definitely work for that. For the blues, I wanted to go with something a little bit brighter on these accessory images, so I went with B24, B26, and B29. So I'll do the rest of the pennant banners, just using that B29 in the corner and then blending out with the B26, and then adding that B24 for a little bit of highlight on one side. And I'll do the one over the doghouse as well, which I think will still stand out nicely since it is a much brighter blue than the combo that I used on the house itself. I'll use just that B24 to do the candle on top of the cake since it's such a small little area. I just did the one shade, and then I'll do the other dog bone ribbon. And then for the balloon animal, I wanted to keep the same combo, but I wanted to go just a little bit lighter to make it look like it's filled with air and now it's transparent. So I took away the B29, add just the barest bit of that B26, and then I began to blend that out with the B24 and the B23. And I'm actually going to bring in the B21 as well to go even a little bit lighter on those highlighted areas. I really like this image. My dog Gemma, she used to have a little toy balloon animal that was shaped like a lion that she absolutely loved until she totally destroyed it. I did try to buy her another one another time, but she destroyed that one too, and so I thought, okay, time for tougher toys. So I used YR04 for the candle flame, and then C1 to add a little bit of shading to that dog paw print. I did decide to make it more of like a plaque on the outside. And then for the roof of the doghouse, I'm going to use E25, E27, and E29. I wanted to use a different brown combo than I had on anything else so far, just to separate it out a bit. And for that, I put the shadow on the underside and the highlight at the top where the light would be hitting it the most. For the ball, I decided to go with like a traditional tennis ball shade, so I used YG00, YG01, and YG03. And then for the grasses, I went with YG13, YG17, and G28. So I'm going to add a touch of that G28 to the base of each of those little blades of grass to give them a little bit more of contrast in those shadowed areas where they're bent away from the light. And then I'll start to blend that out with the YG17. But I'm still saving a sliver of space on there wherever I can for that lightest shade, just to give it some extra dimension. And those I will fill in with the YG13, so we get a nice bright little highlight in there. And that is going to finish up the coloring, so I will take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen, get that started off to the side so that it's flowing nicely, and I'll go over the eyes of my dog who has his eyes open, and then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I used the third of the large stitch rectangle stackables to die cut a piece of cilantro cardstock and a piece of moonstone cardstock, and then I also trimmed out the picket fence border out of white cardstock. I wanted to create a little fenced-in yard for my pups to run around and play in, so I'm going to take some liquid glue and add that to the back of each of those fence posts, just adding a very thin bead of glue behind those, and then running it across the side slats as well. Then I'm going to line that up toward the top of that moonstone piece of cardstock. That's going to become the sky, and I'll get that situated right where I want it. Then I grabbed an acrylic block and laid that over top so I could make sure that that dried nice and flat. Then I'm going to take the cilantro cardstock and line that up over to the side with the grassy border. So I'll get that lined up and add a piece of Post-it tape to hold that in place and run that through my die cut machine. Just testing to make sure that's going to fall right where I want it. And then I'm going to trim off the excess fence on the sides using my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. I wanted to add a little bit of dimension to my fence, so I grabbed a C1 marker and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading on the left side of each of those fence posts. You could go a little bit darker if you wanted to, but I just wanted to have something subtle on there that wouldn't draw too much attention, but would still just provide a little bit of pop so that the fence wouldn't be quite so flat. So I did that on all the ones that were going up and down, and then I turned the cardstock and did it on the bottom edge of the two slats that are running horizontally as well. So a really quick and easy way to add a little bit of dimension there. And then for the grass, I wanted to darken up the top edge. So I'm going to come in with some mowed lawn first. I'm being really careful not to bend those grasses, but I wanted the highlight to be down toward the bottom because that's where the sentiment is going to go. I'm going to darken up that top edge even further by bringing in some rustic wilderness, which is just a little bit darker than the mowed lawn, and they blend really well together. I'm going to work back and forth between those two shades to smooth things out, and then once I'm happy with it, I'll pop it in my Misty so I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm using Blue Jay ink to stamp Happy Woofday to You, which is from the Yappy Birthday add-on. So I stamped that down twice to make sure I had a nice bold impression. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my Misty. I'm using Moonstone cardstock for that as well, just like I did with the focal panel for the sky. And I'm taking another sentiment and some images from the Yappy Birthday stamp set for the inside. And I think that ties in the front really nicely. So once I'm done with that, I'm going to use some pattern paper from the brand new Fruit Salad 6x6 pad. I wanted to go with this blue plaid. I think this also works really great for masculine cards. I think every one of my sons and my husband all have a dress shirt that looks like this. But I'm going to trim that down with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables. And then I'm going to glue that to my card front. And that's going to cover the entire front of the card, which is an A2 4 1/4 tall by 5 1/2 wide. Then I'm going to take the grassy border and I will add that to the front of the focal panel so that those grasses come just up on the bottom of the fence post. And then I'll take some foam tape and add that to the back so I can pop this up and give it a bit of dimension. And I'm using that plaid to make sure that the focal panel is lined up nice and straight on there. Then I'll bring in my images and I'm going to start to glue those down. And I'm going to use the doghouse first. I usually start with my largest images and then work my way to the smaller ones. The doghouse is going to go toward the right hand side of the card, up toward the top there. And then I'm going to balance that out with this little pup that is tangled up in the pennant banners. So I'm just adding some liquid glue to the back of him. And then I'm going to put him at a little bit of an angle there to give him some extra movement, just make him look like he's scampering around the scene. Then I'll take the other little dog. I'm imagining on this card that it is his birthday. So I'm going to place him over on the right hand side, overlapping that doghouse. And then I'll put the dog bowl with the birthday cake right in front of him. And then for the smaller images, I just wanted to lay them out first and make sure that I wasn't going to end up with the right side being too heavy and then have not enough things on the left side, and then the card would be a bit out of balance. So I wanted to make sure I had enough stuff there, and I can also use those little grasses to help fill in things as well. But once I was happy with how it was looking, I could go ahead and pick those up and add some more glue to the back of them and then press those down into place where I want them. For the two little bones, I just kind of tilted them at an angle to make a little pile there. And then I'm going to start fitting in these little grasses. I really love these images. I think they really help fill in a scene nicely. So I tucked one of the larger ones back behind the birthday dog's tail, and then I'm going to put another one down at the base of the doghouse, one of the smaller ones. Because that left side needed a little bit more weight, I took one of the larger grasses and added that down by the bones. It also helps hide the bones a little bit in case, you know, dogs like to hide their little treats. I put one over by the dog bowl and then tucked another one up at the top left there to balance that out. And then of course I wanted to add a bit of Stardust Stickles to just give the scene a little bit of sparkle. I didn't want to go too heavy on this because it is more of a masculine card, but I just couldn't resist having a little bit. So I added it to the pennant banners and also to the ribbons on the gifts and to the flame on the birthday candle. And that is going to finish this one off, so I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. This card will also be on the Lawn Fawn YouTube channel today, so if you really enjoyed it, you can check it out again over there, and I would love your support. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed this one and leave me a comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought might also interest you. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.